Hey geeks, welcome to another exciting episode of Rockin The Code World with dotNetDave. I'm David McCarter. I'm glad you're all here. I just want to start off the show with showing you a picture that I took when I was in Lviv, Ukraine. So this is the town square of Lviv, and I would go down there when I had some time to kill and do people watching and walk around and stuff like that. And I just wanted to share a story real quick that the first thing I noticed when I was sitting in the town square of Lviv, I was sitting there, I was looking at everybody, busy going to work and things like that, because they have a lot of the public transit all kind of starts right there in this area. And the first thing I noticed was there's no overweight people. The only overweight people I saw in Lviv were expectant mothers and a few older people, and that's it. And so later that evening, or one of the evenings when I was with the conference organizers, I told them that, and they said, yeah, because here in the Ukraine, we eat for taste, and you guys eat for quantity. And I go, yeah, that's America. So anyway, I just want to kind of share that story real quick before we get the show started. Anyway, I'm really excited about having Richard Campbell on the show today. I've known Richard for a long time, via Carl Franklin, who's been on the show. And I'm really excited to catch up with him. I haven't seen him in person in a long time, and I miss hanging around with him and Carl and all the other people I hang around with when I go to Microsoft and other places. So, and this is show number 50. Simon, show 50. I can't believe we've done 50 shows already. I was trying to remember them all, and I can't. Luckily, there's YouTube, right? But Mahesh, if you're watching, where's my bouquet of roses? You sent me a bouquet of roses for my second season. What do I get for 50? No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, I'm excited for the show. And, I just want to talk real quick about the Ukraine. I talked more about it last week, so I'm not going to go over all this again. I just want to make sure everybody's thinking about the Ukraine and the people there. Here's some pictures from my trip. I have reached out to some of the people I know in the Ukraine, and I do know the woman you see there at the top, Diana. She was my tour guide. I told you guys about last week for 2 days, and she's doing okay. She's actually posting on Facebook daily, if not more, of the work she's been doing in Lviv. She's still there. She hasn't left, and she's helping out TV crews and restaurants, providing food for people and things like that. So I'm thankful Diana's okay. I haven't heard back from the other people I know there, but I'm going to keep checking in on them. So please send your thoughts and prayers to Ukraine. Please support them as much as you can. And I don't know about you, but I kind of feel helpless. Here in America, there's not much I can do personally, except for give a shout out and tell people how much I love the Ukraine. And but there's a few things we can do in America, and that is to not use products from companies that are still supporting Russia. And the list of products I've been able to come up with this morning is small because I can't find a really good list. And they include IBM, Shell Oil did a secret purchase yesterday of Russian oil, supposedly. Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and McDonald's. So I don't use Coca-Cola or Pepsi or McDonald's products anyway, because they're just horrible for your health. But I definitely won't go to Shell anymore, and I won't use IBM for a long time. So that doesn't count for me. But if you can support them, no matter what it is, please do. We got to get this war over before more people die in the Ukraine. It's just horribly sad when they're killing kids, so anyway, all right. And this week, I don't know, I got a wild idea. And so I've had Scott Hunter on the show a couple times now, and on a conference that I ran in January. And he's the number 2 in Microsoft programming land. But number 1 is Scott Guthrie. And I want to get Scott Guthrie on the show. So I need your help. So I started a change.org petition yesterday, and I need you guys to sign up on this petition. And if I get enough signatures, I'm kind of shooting for at least 1,000 that I want to send it to Scott and see if he'll come on the show. And I can do that if every one of you people watching the show right now, because there's thousands of you, right? If you sign the petition, I can get Scott Goo, I think. Maybe. I don't know. Let's try. All right. I have a new article that seems to be pretty popular in CSharpCorner. It's called Classes, Structures, and Records Oh My. It's kind of where I kind of compare the biggest features and differences between these 3 types of .NET. So I hope you go check it out. And with that, I'd like to bring on Richard. Richard Campbell wrote his first line of code in 1977. And this still isn't over it. He had a bunch of jobs in computing, built a few computers along the way, and companies. Sorry, Richard built a few computers. He built a few companies along the way, and these days does a little consulting, makes podcasts like .NET Rocks and RunAs Radio, is one of the folks behind DevIntersection conferences, as well as being chief cheerleader for the charity Humanitarian Toolbox, which we'll be talking about. So welcome, Richard.
Hi, friend. How are you?
Hey, how's it going, man?
Oh, great. And I appreciate you the call out to Ukraine. The situation is quite horrible, and
it's
not
terrible.
It's not. I'm afraid it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yes, it will, unfortunately. So we all need to do what we can, and and there's not a lot, we can do personally, but especially so far away. But there are some things we can do, right? And so, and one of my hopes, and I know this is off topic of the show, but one of my hopes is that all these companies that are boycotting Russia, like Microsoft and people like that, I hope they stick with it even after the war is over.
I mean, it's very challenging for a multinational like Microsoft, who has Russian employees in Russia and Ukrainian employees in Ukraine. The degrees to the things they can do, and so it takes time, and there's a like a little dance that has to go on. I mean, Microsoft has come out and said no new product, but I think they're concerned about just turning off access to resources. I mean, do you make the situation better or worse?
Right.
So I'm also grateful to see companies within Russia being opposed to the war and making their voice heard too, which in an autocracy like Russia is a very dangerous thing to do. So they're brave people. It is.
I mean, you can get 15 years in prison now.
Yeah.
That's the new law. You can get 15 years in prison, which is more, I heard this morning, which is more years in prison than if you kill somebody. So that's
kind of crazy.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's just it's a strange way to work. But we got to keep going on too. It's interesting to pull back. You kind of pull back for a while and think, what's appropriate? What should I be focused on? And I mean, I'm still making my shows and trying to keep people working. There's lots to be done, and the work doesn't stop.
And my whole, I've been, I had just the best time in the Ukraine, and I've been wanting to go back really bad ever since, and I've been trying, and I haven't been able to get back there. But I think after all this is done, no matter if a conference invites me or not, I think I'm going to go back.
Yes, got to go visit.
Yeah. And I kind of promised the programmer on Twitter I'd come visit him and shake his hand, because I called him a hero on Twitter, and I want to come shake a hero's hand. And so I kind of committed myself.
That's good. We have to set some goals for ourselves too. It's like, I have to do this thing.
Yeah.
It's great to be able to do it.
He's risking his life every day to help other people. And I go, that's a hero in my book.
Yeah, for that doubt.
Yeah. So it's everybody there that can help is doing it. Right.
I think so. And many are going in too. Like, it's quite extraordinary.
Yeah. And I know probably people have heard that, the Ukrainians are very proud people, and yeah, they definitely are. Believe me, they are very, very proud Ukrainians, and very proud of their country and everything that's they've been able to accomplish in relatively a short amount of time.
Yeah.
So
they as an independent nation, definitely.
yeah,
I mean, they coming out of the Eastern bloc of the Cold War. There has been a lot of time, but there's a certain amount of disinformation going on that it's always been a part of Russia, and it's simply not true. There have been people living in that part of the world for millennia.
Yeah.
That's part of the original bread baskets, like some of the first farming going back literally thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
They've got every right to be proud of their heritage and what they've achieved. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, I'm tweeting this later this week, but before I spoke in the Ukraine, I was speaking at Dev something in Vegas, and not your conference, the other one.
One of the other ones.
And you'll never pick me up on. I've tried to go to your conference, but you guys don't like me, I think. But
I don't know if that's true, but competition is fierce for DevIntersection.
I know it is.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was speaking at this conference at the Aria in Vegas, and after I think I mentioned during my session that my next stop is I'm going to the Ukraine for the first time, and
right,
and someone came up to me from the Ukraine afterwards, and he said, what city are you going to? And I go, it was hard because it was a city I've never heard of before, right? And I go, oh, I'm going to Lviv, and he goes, oh, that's the most beautiful city in all of Ukraine, and after visiting there, as you guys can see, I can't imagine a better one.
Quite gorgeous. Yeah,
yes,
beautiful place.
Yes. Anyway, so let's get to talking about code and stuff. So
yeah, for sure.
So let's talk first about the 20th anniversary of .NET and your grossly overdue book.
Yeah, well, embarrassingly, the idea to write that I should be writing down the history of .NET came from the 15th anniversary. So back up, 5 years ago, and there was a part. I'm in Vancouver. I'm only a few hours away from Redmond, and I know a lot of folks there. I work with them on a regular basis, although I've never worked directly for Microsoft. I've been a contractor for various things over the years. And I got approached by a bunch of the .NET folks saying, "Hey, we're throwing this party for the 15th anniversary, just very much an internal thing." And they asked for some help talking to some folks and so forth. And so I ended up doing actually a series of Channel 9 recordings that were sort of happy birthday .NET. And I mean, I've made the .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is turning 20 this year too, right? The podcast's been around a long time, although I joined in 2005. But the history. And I think it's sort of an interesting truth that the engineers, the folks that actually build the product, they focused on their pieces. Rarely did they get a chance to really look at the overall context of how the product came about. And so in many cases, while I was chatting with them about the piece that they worked on, I would often then add the context to that. It's like, well, I remember how it fit in with this and this. And they were like, I never thought of it that way. You're so busy making these remarkable things, you don't always get to see the overall impact that they have.
True. Yes.
So I came out of that experience thinking, should I write this down? Like, does this need to be somewhere? And I'm used to it being my crazy idea. Like, not a lot of folks are going to be all in on that. So I researched for a while. I actually put together a few talks and tried it out on different audiences and tried a few different formats to see what the reaction would be. I'm pretty excited. A lot of folks just don't know the late 90s, early 2000s, the beginning of .NET, how it emerged and what the environment was like and how we built software back then. I mean, it's very different than today.
Very different. Yeah.
And so I spent about a year just sort of testing ideas and so forth, and finally came down to, okay, well, this seems like a good idea. So who do I have to have? Who needs to be on board to make that story viable?
Yeah.
And so, and you brought up one of them, Scott Guthrie. Scott Guthrie, Brian Harry, who led the original CLR team, Jason Zander, who took that over from him, Anders Halsberg.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, and having made, podcasts for a long time, I mean, I have the good fortune to have interviewed and talked to them for many, many years. And so I kind of reached out to all of them and said, listen, I'm thinking about writing a book on the history of .NET. What do you think? Would you participate in that? Can I get your blessing? And they all said yes.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know that's what your book was about, but that is freaking awesome because, when I was preparing for, the 20th anniversary and, I had a, special 20th anniversary show with Carl was on, and Scott Hunter was on and Carl was on and a bunch of other people. And we had a big panel show and we were all talking about, stuff. And, I couldn't find anywhere a definitive list of all the changes of .NET through the years.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find even a graph. I wanted to show a graph of all the releases and all the major things that kind of came out in those releases. I couldn't find one either. Yeah. Microsoft used to do those, but they kind of gave up on them.
Well, and they get lost too. There were pieces done at different times. There was, when version 2 came out in 2005, there was a lot. I've actually got a bunch of that material of them talking about the history of .NET in that context when it was 3 years old. And really it had been in development 3 years before that. And so, that's an interesting segment. And I very much see 4 distinct periods in .NET. You start with that sort of formative era before it shipped, when Microsoft was making their own version of Java, and that was their intended plan for enterprise development. Microsoft doesn't normally make languages. It's not a thing. They take existing languages, typically out of academia, and they do a great implementation of it. They made several versions of BASIC, not just Visual Basic. There were others.
Yeah.
They've made several versions of, they bought FoxPro. They had, done various implementations of C++. Many consider some of the best C++ ever made. And at the time, in the late 90s, were considered one of the best Javas that existed. There was a great story at that time about how there were more copies of Microsoft Java at IBM than IBM Java. Right? Because Java, it was the whole concept of Java at that time was that everybody had their implementation running against their particular configuration, different runtime spaces, and so forth, all based on this what was a very early open source model in the 90s.
Yeah.
But when Microsoft started customizing Java to optimize for Windows, which is a totally sensible thing for Microsoft to do, it was in violation of the agreement they had with Sun. And so Sun put forth a cease and desist, and they had to purge Java from Microsoft. They had to have no trace of it. Wow. And that left them in this problem of, we don't have a pure open-oriented language, object-oriented language that we can use for this enterprise development space. And there was a couple of different initiatives. There wasn't just one, but clearly it was Anders Halsberg's initiative, the C-like object-oriented language, or COOL. That was the code name.
Yeah, the cool name. Yeah.
That won out the day, and so that's how that language came to be. And then there was also a big debate about building their own managed runtime, and because a lot of the senior development folks inside of Microsoft building tools were COM folks, and so they firmly believed in reference counting. That was the approach to, you build reference counts. And Java certainly didn't work that way. They had a garbage collected managed memory model, and there were certain aspects of garbage collection that made a lot of sense, as an approach. And so there was actually a bake-off inside of Microsoft, building runtimes for the precursor to .NET, the original project, of a reference counted implementation and a garbage collected implementation, and the garbage collection was ultimately successful.
Wow, I didn't know any of this stuff you just talked about. I thought I knew a lot about .NET in this history, because I've been here the whole time. I was in production beta 1 of .NET, and so
But that was, I can't wait for your book. Public-facing product. Yeah, I can't wait for my book either.
Get it done, man.
Yeah, I'm telling you. And you're not kidding. I wish by the 20th anniversary, I would have thought I'd been down the second edition, or doing updates and refinements. So I've got 100 hours worth of interviews, privately done with various folks throughout the creation of .NET, to sort of pull this narrative together. And just look at the transformation a product that was ultimately a derivation of Java.
Right.
Not really per se, but they were certainly standing on the shoulders of giants. They saw the things that were great about Java and the problems that existed in Java, like the type system, and tried to improve on that. And they wanted to build a great runtime. But without a doubt, when you think about what they were making in 2000, it was enterprise development tools for Windows. That's what they were making. That's not what we have today.
Yeah.
It's radically different. So
very different.
That story of the transformation of .NET, I think, is this great example of how Microsoft has turned itself, has fundamentally changed from a company that focused on this operating system that everything went into and that everything they made helped sell to this cross-platform, open source cloud provider.
Right.
It's a radically different company. And so a lot of those fundamental tenets in 2000 and when Steve Ballmer, who's now just become CEO, stands up on stage at TechEd in 2000 in Orlando and announces .NET, kind of blindsides everybody. Nobody was expecting big announcements then. We were waiting for another version of Visual Basic.
Yeah, I wasn't happy with that announcement.
You were not alone. When he pops this thing out, like, you can't, the tenets were, this is all about Windows. This is all about working on the internet, right? Microsoft was scrambling to get to the internet. That was the big initiative. And it was going to be open specifications. They published the ECMA specifications for C# and for the runtime. So they were being more open, but there wasn't really open source. They had Rotor by 2002. They had that shared source initiative. They called the code name was Rotor, which was that if you were an academic, you could apply for a license of the source code of .NET. It wasn't compilable, but you could look at it. And that's a long way from 2014 and the Roslyn compiler being released on GitHub.
Yeah,
and
I know.
and being cross-platform. So to me, the fascinating thing is the twists and turns that gets us to this sort of fourth stage where it's all open source, it's all cross-platform, and they actually ultimately decide to rewrite .NET to make that true.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, and what unfortunately, when you're talking, all these memories are coming to the top of my head. I'm going, gosh, dang it. But one of them was, I remember being at Microsoft once at the MVP Summit, and I was in a meeting with Anders, and Anders he said this pretty forcefully. He goes, JavaScript is, I don't know if he used the F word, but he said, JavaScript is broken and someone needs to fix it,
Yep.
And then a few years later, TypeScript.
Yeah.
So that's how he solved it, right? He left the .NET language team and he started TypeScript.
I found a keynote of his from April of 2011. I interviewed Anders extensively in private about that path and the story of Cool and so forth, and the decision to go to TypeScript. And then I was backing it up with other information. It's very forensic, this process. It's one of the reasons it's taken me so long. I'm used to writing tech books, whereas we have a new technology. We got a pretty straightforward deadline, and you're just trying to teach people how to use it. But I'm gathering very much, almost like a crime scene of finding supporting evidence. So I've got, Anders' story from his own mouth, which is awesome. Yeah, but I found this keynote video from April of 2011, where he's still in charge of C#, but he's talking about JavaScript already. You can see his mind is turning about how could we make JavaScript better. And by the end of 2011, he'll hand the reins of C# to Mads.
Right.
And he won't announce TypeScript. We won't hear about TypeScript for another 2 years.
Right.
But at that point, and it wasn't a straight line. I don't know if you remember this tool called ScriptSharp.
I think I do.
Remember that?
I think so. Yeah.
So ScriptSharp was an internal project at Microsoft that allowed you to write C# and compile to JavaScript. Nikhil Kothari was the lead on that. And there were teams inside of Microsoft that depended on it, that they were writing code in C# that compiled to JavaScript. And Anders looked very seriously at it. Like, and I've done an interview with Nikhil about this as well, that they were seriously considered productizing it. That might have been what the alternative to TypeScript.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they ultimately didn't go that way. I mean, there's a bunch of reasons why. But I would argue the most important thing that happened with TypeScript was what it did to Microsoft, not what it did to the market.
Right.
Because by 2013, when TypeScript is coming out, when they've put out the first betas of TypeScript and start sharing it with the world, there's a belief inside of Microsoft that the open source community hates Microsoft, and that nothing they can ever do in open source is going to be good enough. And they've made some mistakes along the way. Remember, in 2010 they had packaged jQuery in the box with 2010, right, which was a remarkable achievement. I see it as a milestone. You've taken, rather than write their own tree spanning tool for the DOM, they used the most popular one in the industry, John Resig's jQuery, right? The right thing to do. They done that in the encouragement of the community, via Codeplex. This is before GitHub.
Codeplex. That was my first. That's where I shared my first code was on source was on Codeplex.
Yeah. And so they had bundled jQuery in, and they kept the original license. Like, they didn't mess with the licensing, although they had made the MSPL, the Microsoft license, which was very much the MIT license. It's just they had a need, or somebody in legal thought it was important that Microsoft have their own license. And eventually they've learned that's really dumb. Just use the MIT license. Like, you're just creating grief for people. But when TypeScript got released, even though inside of Microsoft they thought there's no way anybody in the open source community likes anything coming from Microsoft, TypeScript was the proof that you're wrong. When you do it right, and it's great, they embrace it.
Yeah.
I mean, rivals of Microsoft made contributions to TypeScript. Right?
Wow.
The folks at Palantir who largely drive Java development loved TypeScript and made sure there was a plugin for Java development environments to work with TypeScript. Wow. So all of these open source communities contributed to the various type libraries and interfaces and extensions for TypeScript, and it became this. Microsoft had no control over that. Anders didn't plan on that. Anders is a lovely man, and I adore him.
Yeah,
he's not an open source guy. That's just not who he is, right?
Yeah, I like Anders too.
Yeah, he made Turbo Pascal, he made Delphi, he made C#. Like, the open source, this is not an open source community guy. This is not Richard Stallman. Like, this is a totally different creature. And yet here he'd made this wonderkin of the open source community. It was adored. And so that was like a lightning bolt through Microsoft. It said, when we do the right thing in the open source community, they will embrace us. And it was one of the anchor points that meant that this idea that they could pivot to an open source world and could do their dev tools as open source products was viable. That could be done. Yeah, and there are many others, and we can get to them to some degree, but that to me was one of the most crucial moments that showed this way forward, like that we take for granted now in 2022. Yeah, Microsoft has a huge number of employees who write code on GitHub every day, and that everything in these dev tool spaces is open source. It's just normal.
Yeah. It's understanding the history, I find fascinating, maybe because I'm getting older and I like that kind of stuff. But I think, at least for those of us who've been using .NET for probably maybe over more than a decade, and has seen things come and go and change, and I know a lot of people out there have no idea why all that happened, right? I know some of how it happened, and some of what I know I won't share publicly, right? Because I don't know if Microsoft's going to get ticked off at me.
Well, and you are an MVP, right? You're under NDA.
I'm an MVP, right?
You know inside information.
Yeah. Right. So I know stuff, but I'm not sure if all of it's true. And so, your book would really help out with us understanding, like for, I'm just using this as an example. I'm not, sure if this makes a book or anything, but why was Silverlight all of a sudden dropped, right? I've heard lots of things, and I've heard things that Microsoft people told me that I've never heard in public, right? Sure. So well, those kind of things, I think,
it is a fascinating story, right? Yeah, I mean, a lot of things went on, and I've worked really hard to assemble what I think is a pretty close version of the truth of what happened to Silverlight. Because it's complicated, and because individual viewpoints are colored by their experiences. You know, at the time that Silverlight abruptly gets neglected, essentially, really what ultimately happened was the team was dismantled. It was also a very critical time in time of Microsoft. It was the Windows 8 era. The iPad was seen as a threat.
Yes.
Now, arguably, Silverlight died because of iPad.
Yes.
Right.
Because they wouldn't accept it, right?
Well,
Something like
Jobs's thoughts on Flash is the
Yeah.
death of Silverlight.
Right.
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 And in the end, you can talk about a bunch of reasons of why Jobs did that. But one of the simplest ones is that Flash killed the battery on an iPad. Like if Flash hadn't been such a power hog, this wouldn't have been as big an issue. But I mean, we can make fun of Adobe all day long. Like they create their own grief at times. But Flash was not built for portable devices. Flash was built for desktops. It was an early attempt to do graphical and coding automation on the web, right? Going all the way back to Shockwave.
And, you know, at the time, I personally really liked Silverlight. I thought, you know, what it allowed you to do on the web was pretty amazing.
Yes.
And, you know, and I was really proud. I know Netflix doesn't use it anymore, but that was the first, well, I think it might have been the second web platform that Netflix went to. And so for years, that's what Netflix used was Silverlight, right? And even around that exact same time, the entire Olympics was run off of Silverlight.
Yeah, that was Vertigo's project.
Right, Vertigo. And I thought was going, this is great. You know, let's do more of this. And all of a sudden you wake up one day, boop, gone.
Well, and it's not the reason people are still so upset about Silverlight is that it happened very quickly.
Yes.
And it was never announced or explained.
Yes.
So, I mean, the problem here is that Visual Studio 2010 with Silverlight 4 ships in April of 2010. And I helped run that conference, that event. I was there. And they were promoting Silverlight as the de facto enterprise development strategy. Works on Macs. And that was the out-of-browser version too. So you don't even need to run it in a browser anymore. Works on Macs, works on PC. This is your solution for everything.
Right.
That same month, the iPad is announced. May of 2010, thoughts on Flash. And internally, at that point, Microsoft knows Silverlight is doomed because we're never going to have a plugin that runs on Safari. And that eliminates the iPad and iPhone.
Yeah.
But it's not announced. They don't say that. They don't say anything, actually.
Right.
And part of that is during this is now the drive for Windows 8. They're very quiet. They're not talking publicly about anything. And nobody set out to kill Silverlight. That's not what happened.
Right.
What actually happened was that there were people, the Silverlight team was being pulled apart. The folks were going over to Windows Phone, which in that early days of Windows Phone was running a version of Silverlight. And folks were being pulled into the Windows team to do the XAML implementation for Windows, right? I mean, this was all... You know, Silverlight was the hotbed of XAML development at that time. And the team literally got pulled to pieces until you get to October of 2010. And that's the PDC. In fact, it's the last PDC.
It's the last one.
Yeah. And it was in Redmond. And there are no Silverlight sessions. So in April at the conference, in April at the Dev conference, Silverlight is the center of the place.
Yeah.
By October, only 6 months later, there's no Silverlight sessions. Now, the first question you have to ask is, why were there no Silverlight sessions?
Yeah.
Nobody submitted any. It was an internal, PDC's internal only. It's up to the teams to fight for sessions because there basically was no Silverlight team left. So they didn't put any in.
Yeah.
And quite reasonably, Mary Jo Foley, arguably one of the most famous writers and reporters on the Microsoft space, got a hold of Bob Muglia, who was the president of Server and Tools at that time at PDC, and asked him, "Hey, why no Silverlight sessions?" Now, I've had the opportunity to interview Bob about this as for the book, and so I asked him, "It's like, do you remember talking to Mary Jo about this?" And she's like, "Yeah." It's like, "Do you understand that you were the first person at Microsoft to talk about the state of Silverlight since the Dev conference in April of 2010 at that time?" He said, "No, we didn't know." And what did Bob say when he said, why no Silverlight sessions? He said, our strategy has shifted. That's all he said, right? And I think the way he said it really implied the sort of truth, which is they had been talking about this internally for a while, but nobody had gotten their act together to say, how do we talk to our community about this? And this is why I think people got so angry. Now, to Mary Jo's credit, you can still go back and read this article. She doesn't say anything about Silverlight being dead. She just says exactly what Bob said. Other writers grabbed that and said Silverlight is dead. To which then folks are contacting Microsoft saying, is Silverlight dead? And they're not answering because they're basically on a gag order at that time.
Yeah.
And that's why are people upset? Because they were blindsided.
Yes.
Normally, I mean, technologies get superseded all of the time. This could have been handled differently.
Yes.
Once you knew that this was a problem, you build a migration path.
Right.
I mean, admittedly, it's not like Silverlight stopped working. It didn't burst into flames.
No, you can still use it. Yeah.
You could still use it even today. It's getting harder with IE being phased out. It's going to get really hard to work do anything in Silverlight now. But it can, and they did ship another version. Eventually it went into maintenance and they put out 5, and that was the last version, which was in 2012, which is why in 2022 we're finally seeing it come out of support, because it came with a 10-year long-term support agreement. Right, and this is the end of it now. But that's not enough. You have to tell people what's going to happen. You have to give them a path. You have to give them recommendations. In fact, the next time after Bob Muglia's mention, the next time there'll be a mention to it will be a paper put together by a fellow by the name of David Carmona, who's still around. That was a position paper for enterprises for all the different technologies. There was a bunch of different ones. And that would be the next, and pretty much the last time Microsoft would say anything about Silverlight. And at that time, they said Silverlight is perfectly viable for applications within your organization.
Yeah, it looks like John, who's one of the people watching, says he still uses Silverlight, I guess, at work. And it looks like they're maybe changing it to Blazor.
And isn't it interesting that Blazor is the bridge, right? And wonder if it could have been a bridge sooner. We've also talked about on .NET Rocks a project called Open Silver. And Open Silver is a WASM implementation of Silverlight. It's supposed to be able to, you're able to take your Silverlight code and with minor changes, compile it into this WASM model and continue on. And so we've had Giovanni and the folks, I've been paying attention to that for a couple of years now. That they are recognizing this deadline coming, that for folks who want to migrate off of Silverlight, while Blazor is quite a bit of a different model and very compelling, the Open Silver approach is let's make minimum changes to your code go across. Now it's an open source library and it's got its own dependencies and there's things you need to do, and there are aspects that work don't work, but there's also choices. But again, these largely didn't come from Microsoft. Microsoft did not build Blazor as a bridge for Silverlight. And normally, with a technology like that and their relationship with enterprises, they would have. So that's what makes Silverlight such a painful spike for people. Not that the technology got retired, but that Microsoft did not manage the retirement.
Yes. Yeah. And Microsoft in the past has been not very good at that kind of stuff. And I think they're
I would also argue
better
they've
at
been
it.
extremely good at it, right? I mean, they literally made a special version of Java called J# to migrate their Java apps, folks that had built on J++, over to .NET.
No,
so
I was talking about communication of why things are happening. That's kind of what I was talking about.
Well, no, and normally it's
being
a very
closed off,
process.
you know.
Well, then that was a weird time. That period from late 2010 till about 2012 was, I would consider, the darkest days for Microsoft and .NET internally. That is largely driven by the challenges around Windows 8. And as we come out of that in 2012, things change, and we now pivot. The company pivots. If you talk about the actual truth here, David, what happened in this time span of 20 years is that they went from a company that was focused on an operating system to a company focused on the cloud. And those changes, that transformation happens in that period. Windows 8 is the last effort to make Windows the center of the company. After that, the cloud is the center of the company.
Yes, true. Well, we're actually running short on time, so I want to make sure we get to your open source disaster response app, because when you and I talked about this earlier this week, I found it really fascinating, and so I wanted to make sure that we talk a little bit about that before we go.
Sure.
So, do you want to explain what that is exactly? Because it's cool.
It still ties back to .NET and .NET Rocks. Back in 2012, we were doing those road trips around new versions of Visual Studio, and the first one was back in 2005. I was new as a co-host of .NET Rocks. I was the third co-host. The previous two had each done 50 shows, so I was thinking, I'll do 50 shows. I was wrong. I came on board for show 100, and we recorded last week's show 1785. So yeah, missed it by a little bit. But in that first 50 shows, Carl's like, hey, let's do a cross-country road trip in an RV to promote Studio 2005. Right. And we got some sponsorship from Microsoft and from a couple of the other component vendors and so forth. And we went from user group to user group, telling stories.
Came to mine twice.
Having a great time. Yeah. So fast forward several years later, 2012, the road trip is epically huge. It is a big production. We did 34 cities in 13 weeks.
I was on that city too. I was on that list too.
You were there too. And one of the ideas was we should include a charitable element to it. And I talked about the frustrations I had with seeing how hard it was for developers to donate their skills, their software skills to charities. Because software is not just coding, right? There's a responsibility to code. There's the way I used to phrase it, and it's still funny, it's like, software's free the same way a puppy is free. Right? Like there are consequences to owning software. You need some care and feeding. And so that was the sort of catalyst of an idea that could we build an organization that took the responsibility part and just allowed developers to volunteer.
Right.
That if you've got a few hours to spend, let me show you a project that has some meaning and that can use your help and that will take care of your code for you. Ultimately, we're asking you to walk the puppy today, but we'll take it for the rest of the time, and other volunteers will help out. That's the core of Humanitarian Toolbox. We focused on disaster response and preparedness, largely because I did not want to be U.S. centric. I'm a Canadian born in New Zealand. I'm very much I feel a child of the world. I love to see different parts of the world, as I know you do. And so how do we build something that would be relevant anywhere in the world, that any programmer anywhere could see this could help my community? And that's why we focus on this disaster preparedness. Different parts of the world have different risks of different kinds of disasters. I mean, we're both on the West Coast, North America, so we care about earthquake, volcano, tsunami, but also forest fires, floods, and then you get in the interior of the U.S. with Tornado Alley is a whole other thing. Hurricanes and typhoons are all over the world, as are earthquakes. We're all dealing with fire.
More and more these days, right?
The COVID-19 pandemic is the same sort of thing. And so we've had a bunch of different projects over the years that we've helped with different organizations to deal with disaster response. But our current main active project is a project called 2 Weeks Ready. And it's based on this idea that the emergency preparedness professionals have been telling us that after a major event, hurricane, earthquake, whatever else, you should be able to take care of your family for up to 2 weeks without outside help.
Right.
So what are the things you need in your home to be able to survive for 2 weeks until help can get to you in the worst case scenario? And that's a lot of stuff. That's a long list, starting with actually having a plan.
Right.
And so, if you collect all the brochures that emergency preparedness folks provide for you, we'll have a stack of paper, and it's hard to organize all this. And let's face it, we're tech people. How do we bring mobile and cloud to the disaster preparedness problem? Right. That's 2 weeks ready, right? It's sort of this acknowledgement that any given family group, there's one member of the family that's the disaster planner, right? But everybody needs to know the plan.
Right.
So why wouldn't we leverage our phones so that the plan may be created in one place, but copies of it can be maintained on all the phones?
Right.
Because after an earthquake, the internet may or may not be up. And that's when you need that plan.
Probably won't be up.
Yeah. So the fact that it's already in your phone is going to make your life much easier, and that you, at least the whole family, has the same plan. This is where we gather. This is the evacuation routes away from low-lying areas. Well, how do I turn off the gas in the house? You know, all of those things. So there's that family plan, but then there's also the process of building your emergency kit. And that's not something you do in a day. You just don't order it on Amazon, although you can spend a lot of money to do that.
Yeah, you can spend a lot of money to do that. Yeah.
But you can build up your kit over time, right? So how about an app that helps you with what I'm going shopping again? What's the next thing I should add to my kit? I've got a little bit of budget each month to add to the kit. What's the next thing? Check it off the list. If we're storing food or medicines as part of our kit, what's their expiry dates? When do I
was just going to ask you that question.
How long do the batteries last, right? All of these things can be part of that software to make it really easy, so that on a route and on your weekly shop, that you add an item and that you check and that you acknowledge an expiry. So before that case of soup goes bad, you know that there's now no longer food, you can actually eat it, right? And replace it with a new one, so we don't waste anything. Right. Yeah. Same thing.
Don't want to throw away food.
Well, maintaining 2 weeks worth of your medicines for your family, for your dog, all of those things had to have excess in storage, but don't let it expire. Those expiry dates can be anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. So as it gets closer to expiry, rotate those older meds back into the system so you consume them and put new ones back into storage.
And that's why it's good to have that's like why it's good to have like a 3-month a prescription, right? Because then you get 3 months at one time. Not only is it cheaper, right? But then, you know, you have enough if something happens, like, you know,
to put some aside, right?
And I've personally been thinking a lot about that very subject, even before you and I talked earlier this week about, I was, you know, sitting on my couch, like probably millions of other people going, oh shit. You know, what happens if something happens here and I don't have access to the grocery store, and, you know, I do have some food, you know, saved up, you know, but I only have a couple days. Right. And so,
but I'm just thinking in terms of, think of the people in Ukraine that picked up and headed to Poland. What would you pick up to leave the country? Right. And so preparedness is about, you'd know what to pick up. You wouldn't forget. I mean, how many
most important things?
How many folks now are successfully in Poland and thinking, "Oh, I forgot." Right. And so making a plan is a big part of that. So, but there's so many parts to doing this well. And let's face it, disaster preparedness doesn't act on you, right? It's a planning process. So how do we provide a tool to make it really easy to do that and to maintain it with a minimum amount of energy?
Right.
You can't. You don't have. We have things to do. So to make it easy to also have this ready so that when you need it, it's available for you. That's the mindset of 2 weeks ready.
Hey, Simon, the URL for the Humanitarian Toolbox is in the event for this. Can you put that up on the screen so everybody, and put it in the chat? There you go. I can't remember off the top of my head.
So we actually have a few domain names. We have humanitariantoolbox.com, but you have to know how to spell humanitarian. Easier is htbots.org.
htbots.org.
If you go to htbots.org, that's the charity, and you'll see us. In fact, it happens to be this weekend, today, right now, we're having a codeathon.
That's right.
So over on Twitch, a bunch of the regular contributors to the 2 Weeks Ready project have been spending some time writing some part of the 2 Weeks Ready app, and then raiding over to the next contributor. And I think at this particular moment, Carrie Payette, the coding bandit, as she's called.
Carrie,
is on. It's streaming right now, working on code. I can see on GitHub there's some PRs coming in. So she's been working hard on all the code there. But we've had Jeff Fritz kicked it off, and then one of our regular contributors, David Paquette, ripped through a bunch of things. Carrie's next, and following Carrie, I believe, is David West with two S's. David West is also a regular Twitch streamer, and he's gotten involved in that. So
maybe I'll volunteer to do code reviews, because that's what I do most these days.
The project itself is a progressive web app. So there's a bunch of different pieces to this, right? There's the app that individuals will run to do their family plans and maintain things and so forth. And we made that a PWA so they're not dependent on the App Store, that it's easy to keep up to date, and it tends to be resilient. in the face of broken infrastructure. And it is written in Vue with Vuetify. We're still on Vue 2. There's an epic to move to Vue 3, but that's a big shift for a lot of folks. So we've been sort of contemplating that for a while. Privacy is a huge part. If you think about the data you're going to put together for your family to share, it's a lot of very personal information, phone numbers, contact information, medical information, and so forth. And so privacy is a huge part of this.
Sure.
And we do provide we are running a cloud service for this, but the whole point is that all of your data is encrypted on your phone, and we never get the keys. We don't need them. We will take that blob of encrypted data and we'll store it for you if you want to back up. We don't have to, but the main thing is it gets pushed to the other phones that you think are important, and they have the keys so they can decrypt it. Right. And so a lot of the software is just based on how do we move these encrypted blobs around for you.
Sure. I think this is going to be a great tool that people can use from all over the world, when you get it done. And I definitely will use it. I'll be one of your first users. That's for sure.
I appreciate that.
And because I need to do that, it's especially living alone. I need to make sure I get all that stuff,
organized. But
organized.
You also consider the prospect of being able to pass that blob of data to a family friend. You're in the Ukraine and something happens to your home.
Yes.
To be able to because you've already done the work to say, here's the water shut off, here's the gas shut off, all of the details of your house, to just be able to put that over to a friend and say, hey, can you go check my place? Here's how you do all of these things. They just have a copy of the blob of data. Yeah,
I've been living in my place for 22 years now, and I still can't remember which one of those pipes is my water. I have to go down there and do one of them and see if it turns it off. Right. I can never remember which is left or right. Which one of these is my water, you know?
So, and there's to the point, and it's certainly a feature we haven't got in the app yet, but love to put in, which is this whole, hey, give us a video recording of the water shut off for your house. So built into the app, make a blob recording, you figure out which one it is. And as you have that recording, now you have it too.
Yeah.
Here's my water shut off. Here's my gas shut off. Here's my power shut off. Like all of the things that we are concerned about after disaster that might make our place uninhabitable, or dangerous, right? And then to have that information, so if you're not home and your spouse needs to do it, or your kids need to do it, or your neighbor needs to do it, you can provide that blob for them to do that.
Yeah, the video go a long way, especially for people who don't know how to do those kind of things.
Sure, make it a lot less threatening. Here's dad actually turning off the gas. Right here, I got this tool from the toolbox. I go over here and I turn it like this. Now it's off. Very clear and concise, so folks know what's going on. So
that's great.
The project's in GitHub. If you go to github.com/htbox, you'll see all of our projects there. 2 Weeks Ready is one of them.
Okay.
And all open source, all volunteer built.
That's awesome.
Humanitarian Toolbox is a 501c3, an American charitable organization. We're looking at registration in more countries over time. It's expensive. It costs money to run a charity, oddly enough.
Yes.
And we are part of Microsoft Philanthropies. So Microsoft Philanthropies basically gives us as much as Azure as we need, along with some M365 and things like that. We are a charity born in the cloud. We're unlike a lot of charities. Not only do we depend on the cloud, we know how to use it too. And so we do a lot there.
Yeah, and it's important to have those things cached locally, right? Because not only because of I know not only because you might not have the internet, but you might have somebody turning off your access to Azure or something, right?
Sure.
I mean, some rogue person who runs a country, right?
Yeah.
Shutting off access to certain apps and things like that, right? You don't need that, right? You already have everything right there.
You think about every time you're in California, about earthquakes, and what did the emergency service say? It's like, please don't use the phone right after an earthquake.
Exactly.
Don't bury the system. But if we put out a tsunami warning, you need to get to higher ground. So part of your plan is, from my workplace, what's the best route to higher ground? And it's already on your phone, so you don't have to look it up.
Right.
When the warning comes through, you know what to do.
Yes.
Right. That's part of good planning, is where do we work? Where do we go to school? Where do we live? Where do we worship? And what should we do if we're in any of those places? if a fire, do this. If an earthquake, do this. If a tsunami, do this. So you have a plan. And the same is going to apply to hurricanes, tornadoes, and all of forest fires, all of those disasters.
Yeah. And that's, I was just thinking back to like when I was a kid, or even when I had kids, the only thing we had to prepare for is, which window to jump out of if there's a fire, right? I mean, we had drills about that, right? But that was basically it.
And
right?
gather in the yard, right?
Right.
Get out of the house, the closest window, and come to the front of the house.
But that was it. That was our emergency preparedness, right?
We can do more, but that's a good plan. The question is, do you remember it at the time? Because often during these disasters, you're not thinking that well anyway. That's the beautiful thing about having a written list. I spent a long time on the IT side of work making these in case of plans. And mostly they were about, we had an office that burned down and people were so traumatized and so upset. They're not thinking clearly, even though they have the information, they can't organize it. So the fact that it was all together in a book called In Case Of, that, by the way, wasn't in the building, meant that, here's how we do payroll. Here's how, here's our insurance numbers. All of those. We did that in paper as DR strategies years and years ago. Today, you should be doing it with a phone, and every family should be doing it with a phone.
Yeah. Well, I got to let you go because Simon's going to get upset at me. But I definitely want to have you back on the show when you have your book out, if not before.
Oh, for sure. Because I'm trying to get it done for the end of the year.
I definitely want to hear more stories. This is your book sounds so fascinating. I can't wait to read it. And if you want to send me a copy and I'll review it and publish it, I'll do it.
I appreciate that.
But I'll buy one anyway. I'm not doing it for a free copy, right?
Well, I think now the question is, will you read the paper copy, or do you just want it on your shelf and you'll read a Kindle copy?
No, I'll read a paper copy. I like books.
Yeah,
I like books. I don't like paper. I mean, I don't like Kindle.
I do hear a lot of folks really want to own the book, History of .NET. Like they want that on their shelf. But I like Kindle reading.
Yeah, and I like it kind of like that. You can have it on a shelf, and I don't know. I'm an old school guy. I like books,
Well, I'm thinking I'm looking forward to getting it done, and enough of the pandemic being over that I can do a proper book tour. Can go from city to city, tell these stories, and share the book, and and enjoy it. To be honest, well,
if you want to come to San Diego, I'll make it happen. I'll make an event happen. I'll create an event for your book tour.
I'll lean on you for that, David. Absolutely,
you will.
Thank you.
Please feel free to do that.
All right.
Yeah, I'm not just saying that. I mean it.
I believe you. I've called you before, David. We've done shows before. We will again.
Well, thank you so much. This has been just an awesome show. I'm going to have to go back and watch because I was thinking all the time I was thinking about memories the whole time you were talking. So I'm going to have to watch this episode a couple more times.
Yeah, but it's been one of my favorite things about telling those stories. Like I've got versions of the History of .NET I've done as talks, and you can see the attendees as I reach their history. Yeah. Now you're talking about me, and you can see it in their face as you work your way through the timeline. That's me now. You're talking about me. It's very powerful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you very much, and I can't wait to chat with you again or hang out with you in person again. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, David. It's great to talk to you.
Thanks. Wow, that was a awesome interview with or discussion with Richard. That was I feel really good. Thank you, Richard. That was really amazing, and I can't wait for that book to come out. So you better hunker down and do it. That's all I'm going to say. So got a couple more things and then we're out. I hope you go to my news section on my website. I put most of my code performance book up there. I actually did a talk at the Philly Code Camp yesterday about this. And so if you want to learn what I talked about at Philly Code Camp, please go to there and you can read all that stuff about code performance, because Rich and I talked about the cloud, and performance is super important on the cloud, because the slower things are, the more your company is going to get charged, or you personally if you're doing something like for a nonprofit org. So make sure you read everything you can about code performance, and so I hope you'll check out my website for that. And like every week, everybody wins a copy of Code Rush from DevExpress, my favorite refactoring tool and the only one I've used for Visual Studio. please go to devexpress.com/dotNetDave and get a real licensed copy of CodeRush. It's not fake or anything like that. So I hope you go check it out. And if you like it, let me know. Or if you think there's, needs improvements, I know the people that run the company. Just let me know and I'll tell them about it. So check it out. And here's some humor I saw yesterday I thought was funny. We are agile. By agile, you mean confused and clueless. That's a grim way of describing it, but yes. Sorry, I got to pick on agile. It's not agile itself. It's the way companies implement agile that I've seen is quite comical. And also, I'm still raising money for the kids in the slums in India that I visited back in 2019. So I haven't checked on the total yet, but the last time I looked, it was approaching $600. So if you got a couple bucks to spare, please go to that URL and put it into that, and I'll send it to the kids in India. I actually have a call later this week with one of the organizers of this NGO. They really need your help. I know Ukraine needs your help. They do, but the kids in India need help too. So if you can help out, I hope you'll help me help these kids. Because of my support, they've been able to restart their vocational training for vocational training for women at the Voice of Slums. So I'm really proud of that. And but that's because of you. So either donate there or buy my code performance book, and all the proceeds goes to the NGO. All right, so no show next week. I'm actually taking a vacation. It'll be the second time I've left my Del Mar, California bubble in over 2 years, and I'm super excited. I'm going to go up to Oregon, and I'm going to hang out with a guitarist that I used to work with back in the 80s, the #1 heavy metal band in San Diego. And so it's going to be great to catch up with Vinny and hang out with him in a beautiful area of our country. And so I'm so happy to get the heck out of San Diego before my new job starts the week after that. So no show next week. Also, there's the URL if you want to help me book Scott Guthrie. If all of you go there right now, I might be able to get them booked. So please go there. Also, please be safe about COVID. It's still not over. Please donate your blood to your local blood bank. That's super important, no matter if there's COVID or not. I'm donating tomorrow. And I was thinking about that earlier this morning, and I was going to tell you guys, if I can sit on a machine that sucks my blood in and out of my body for 2 hours to donate platelets and plasma, you can donate 30 minutes and donate red blood cells. There's no excuse unless there's a medical one. So please go help your fellow human by donating local blood in your local blood bank as soon as possible. And with that, thank you so much. I love this show, and thanks for 50 shows. Thank you so much, Simon, for making this show so much easier for me to do. Thank you, Mahesh, for suggesting to do this show. I've had a great time in these 50 episodes. I hope there's another 50 coming, and maybe more. We'll see. With that, I'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks so much.